Hello, and welcome to another Infinity the Game video. In this video, we'll be talking about Dashat Company. Dashat Company are one of Infinity's mercenary companies, a non-aligned army, and they're one that has had to change the most in response to N4's changes to the game. In N3, obviously, they were extremely well positioned in the high model count, high order count meta, but in N4, with that having had to be changed and constrained by the introduction of tactical window of 15 trooper limit, Dashat Company has had to change as well. And I've been working on them recently and updating and refining my lists, and I found that to be a really interesting process because of how different a Dashat Company list looks compared to how they looked in N3, while still being really interesting and really effective, especially with some of the new profiles that have come out and the changes that we've seen in ITS Season 13. So just to set the scene a little bit, this is an example of what a list in early N4 might have looked like for Dashat Company. It's using all of the pieces that you would recognize from N3 if you are familiar with Dashat at the time. And it's notably built around McMurrough and then two fire teams, both based on Zhuyongs. So there is a Zhuyong core team with a tactical awareness heavy machine gun, a Rui Shi who can join that team, fleshed out by bounty hunters, and then a Haris with a tactical awareness heavy machine gun, Valeria Gromos, a tactical awareness tinbot Zhuyong, for 8 total troopers, including a paramedic, all of which can kind of join or wildcard together to form some combination of a core and a Haris, both with the Zhuyong subtype. In Combat Group 2, we've also got 2 Libertos. In this case, only one of them is a mine layer in order just to fit the SWC to carry in all the rest of the guns, and a Dozer and a 112. The 112 is there over a Gulam Doctor simply because I only had 3 points. I didn't have the 3 spare points to upgrade the 112 to the superior Gulam. This is a list that I think I either played exactly this or something very much like it in early N4, translating Dashat through to the additions. And it's got some very obvious strengths, right? So McMurrough is a good piece. It's also absolutely swimming with orders. Although the tactical awareness orders are challenging to consolidate into a single fire team, you can. More often you will spread them around. Usually I found that one tactical awareness HMG order in the core and then 2 tactical awareness orders in the more active Haris was a fairly good balance. But regardless, that is a 13 order plus 1 impetuous combat group 1. So it's extremely heavy on orders, even by the standards of, say, Invincible Army, which would be just about the only army that can exceed it thanks to NCO. And of course, an avatar list is packing an equivalent number in the first combat group, albeit sort of concentrated around a single asset. Now, the reason why I call this kind of an old army in terms of N3 standards is that N4 standards is that it really is just attempting to translate what worked in N3 into N4. High order counts and Zhuyong were good. Bounty Hunter wildcards into links to fill them out were good. Therefore, this list is probably good. And indeed, it's basically fine, but it does have a few notable weaknesses. And these are actually the weaknesses that you'll see in a lot of lists that are this style of list that is just a translation of what was good in N3. Let's try and make it work in N4. So the couple that are worth noting. Firstly, the list has a relatively low number of moving parts. It's not low complexity, but it's got low sort of technicality, you'd almost call it. It has a core, which puts out really good firepower, and it has a Haris, which is flexible, and it has McMurrough. Those are the only 3 moving parts in the first combat group, and then combat group 2 has a relatively limited pool of orders and irregulars to either support or potentially launch attacks with Libertos. That means that in total, the list has a maximum of 5 individual attack vectors: core, Haris, 2 skirmishers, and McMurrough. That makes it easy for your opponent to plan around and defend, which is more relevant in N4, where hacking is more powerful reactively, and we have kind of a different mix of reactive options. In addition, and I played this and I found this as a flaw in the list, it tops out at damage 15. The best gun in the list is the Rui Shi, which is damage 14. Otherwise, it tops out at heavy machine guns on the Zhuyong. And so if your opponent puts a particularly tough tag in a high spot on Overwatch and is able to zone out McMurrough, you might just not be able to kill it. armor 8 up to 11 in cover versus damage 15 from a HMG or 14 from a Spitfire, you kind of can force damage through eventually, but it's a bit of a fool's errand. And if your opponent especially does something like they deploy an avatar on a building and are able to keep McMurrough away, you might just be done. That might be the game. There's one source of smoke. The hacking you can't neutralize the avatar with hacking because it's the avatar. And there are sort of similar use cases, right? Any particularly strong tag that your opponent is willing to leverage as an ARO piece can really no-sell this list. It also potentially struggles with other very, very high-quality ARO pieces, although the Rui Shi should be able to engage core-linked ultra snipers. So that's like bolts and grenzers, but there's a very good chance that you get equally no-sold into something like a Knight of Justice in a core link with the missile launcher. Even like a Riot Girl missile launcher, you're inviting ballistic skill 18 or ballistic skill 16 attack versus their ballistic skill 16, and kind of just hoping that you win. Although the list has redundancy in both an engineer and a doctor, it really sucks to have those turns where you lose the face-to-face roll and you try and fix yourself, and you lose the face-to-face roll and you try and fix yourself. So while I would say this is a very good list in kind of just generic terms, it rolls some very big dice and it rolls them well. It is not a list that I found satisfying or effective in N4. And so I kind of put Dashat on the shelf for a while to percolate. And what I was waiting for basically was to get an understanding of how the meta had changed, but also for things to change for Dashat. And the first interesting change that caused me to come back to and revisit the faction was the release of Fiddler. So this is a starting list kind of built around that initial core, but with Fiddler in the list. Now there's a few, janky things in here. You can see that there's a Ludwan, which is a very serviceable piece, but kind of, in this case, it's 0 SWC gunfighting, because I've gone and I've included a guided missile remote. But the rest of what we can see here is sort of pretty similar. There are 2 Libertos, again, to fit SWC, only one of them is a mine layer. There's McMurrough, there's one biker, there's a Zhuyong core, no Haris in this case, because independent attack duties are being picked up by the unlinked Ludwan, Fiddler, and to an extent the guided missile strike capacity. There's an engineer in the list now because of Fiddler, so she can repair either the Ludwan or the Rui Shi, which means that we then have points just for, we have points to upgrade the Gulam Doctor, so it all kind of fits together a little bit better. In this list, I've also shifted the Libertos up into Combat Group 1, with the idea kind of being that the core link wants to be a bit of a rampart sweeper, where it will hose down whatever is on Overwatch, short of a tag, and anything that it can't hose down, I will use Gromos to lay pitches. If need be, she can reload off of the Camille and launch guided missile strikes, or alternatively, I will just use all of that group's orders to fuel an attack either by the Libertos or McMurrough. Now that's a kind of sketchy Combat Group 1 order count, 6 regular, 5 irregular, but you can kind of spend your command tokens. You will use those to fuel those irregulars. You kind of make do with what you need to there. And because the core link is not trying to advance aggressively, it can if it has to. It doesn't really want to. You are not as beholden to having to keep those orders in reserve in order to pull the link back after it's attacked in like the same way that you would a tag. And then in Combat Group 2, you have both the Ludwan and Fiddler as independent attack pieces. Fiddler has sort of really consistently proved herself to be very good. I will get to more of how she plays as we run through some games. But this was kind of like this was the intermediary point in what has become a list that I've really enjoyed. So this has still got the Zhuyong HMG presence. I would actually comfortably play this list today, maybe considering something else in place of the Ludwan. But broadly, I really like this. It worked quite well. I don't think I dropped a game with this. All if I did, it was probably to an avatar. So just a solid list and really making use of Fiddler. And in particular, why Fiddler is useful in this list is that the problem that Dashat has, which I haven't really mentioned till now, is the great advantage that they had in N3, which is that Dashat is possibly the game's best economy sectoral. They have truly outstanding pieces for very, very cheap costs. Like the Libertos for 9 points, either profile, is probably the best skirmisher for its cost in the game when you add mimetism to it. The Mine Layer Libertos in particular is spectacular because it brings back that N3 ability to play the shell game, which one is the Libertos, which one is the mine, which, frustrates your opponent's ability to unpick where your defenses are actually layered. And then Zhuyong are very solid budget heavy infantry, which you then can core link. Now, even invincible armies don't do that extensively now. The invincible army relies more heavily on kind of upgunned and upstatted Shang-Chi and characters to really carry an uber heavy link. But in Dashat, we have sort of the baseline Zuyongs as an economy core that is made even more effectively an economy core by the excellent Authorized Bounty Hunter, which at 12 points with a submachine gun and an acrolat cannon, you can randomly roll up booty that gives them a really good gun. They're a BS-12 link filler with a great disposable weapon and decent short-range weapon. The Bounty Hunter was a signature piece. You would run maximum availability of Bounty Hunters in the previous edition and maximum availability of Fanus remotes because they were very cheap, very effective orders, and all the Bounty Hunters could link. Now, you'll see in this list there are 0 Fanus. That is because the problem that Dashat has in N4 is that you can only take 15 troopers. There is no space when your army is so economical for even more economical order generators. You could easily run an N3 style list in N4 Dashat if you were playing unlimited insertion, unrestricted mode. But most games are not playing that, so Dashat's problem is that it tops out lower than every other sectoral because all of its value is in its cheap pieces. You have this situation where you'd almost have the US Ariadne problem, not quite so bad, where you are an incredible 200-point sectoral, and at 300 points, you struggle to spend all of those 300 points. So what do you use your points on? You start looking for more luxury pieces. Before Fiddler came out, I was actually experimenting with the Hulang, but Fiddler is much, much better than the Hulang. But she's a bit of a luxury piece. She's very expensive at 42 points. Fairly expensive at 42 points. She's great in Dashat because Dashat is desperate for something to spend its orders on, luxury pieces that it can make be the hero of the list, that it then so ably supports with this incredible budget package that makes up the rest of the sectoral. Then we get to this. So this is the first iteration, or kind of like the second iteration of a modern ITS Season 13 post-tag raid list that is trying to do something different with the faction. Now, just to note, the Rafiks that you can see there are points cost stand-ins for the 14-point chain rifle and grenade digger armed prospector profiles introduced in tag raid. At time of recording, those are not yet in Infinity Army, so I've just found a 14-point troop to use instead. Now, firstly, you'll notice that this list abandons Zhuyongs. Instead, Combat Group 2 is made up of a Gulam Corps. This is something that I've wanted to experiment with for a while, and I'm glad that I did, because it is a really interesting take, and it leans into some lessons that I learned from Hassassin Baram, chiefly that Gulam are incredible in this edition. They are probably the best light infantry link in the game, maybe competed with by moderators, and of course Fusiliers are very, very good. But what really makes Gulams is, firstly, in the 2 sectorals that they are quite good in, that's Dashat Company and Hassassin Baram, they have quite good wildcards. Hassassin Baram, especially with Yara Haddad and Asawira, etc. But you have interesting support option wildcards in Dashat Company. So we've got Valeria Gromos, who is a very serviceable hacker, interestingly with a really good possession program and a core linked picture. And she's whip 14 and etc. She is probably she's more expensive and maybe not quite as good as a Hassassin Barid is in Hassassins, but that does not make her bad because the Barid is the most efficient hacker for cost in the game, basically. Gromos is really, really good. and she can go into the link and she can fire her pitcher, which lets the link do that. There's also the NCO. That's the second part of the puzzle. So it's an NCO with both a grenade launch and a smoke grenade launcher, which means it can lay smoke for your list if it needs to advance, but it can also spec fire out to 24 on 8s. And that's just a really useful use of the NCO, spending the lieutenant's order. Being able to just 3 times a game, if all that this link does, if all it is an auto battery, but 3 times a game, it just fires grenades, then on average, it will hit one of those most games. And it's hard to dodge spec fire when it hits because you're at -3. So it is rare to go through a game without getting a spec fire kill, which is interesting and unique. There's also a bounty hunter as the gun in the link. It's only a light infantry, but as I mentioned, bounty hunters can sometimes high roll. And by taking a weapon, like a reliable weapon on the bounty hunter, you open up rolling up really high armor or a mimetism -6 or some other piece. And then there's the Gulam lieutenant. In this case, all of my previous lists had a just standalone Gulam lieutenant. Now it's in a link and we have a decoy. Although, to note, you can also take a doctor in this link in place of the non-lieutenant Gulam, which can be useful, although it will flag that Gulam as your link leader. The core group, the main group, is probably the star of the show here, though. So just while we're talking about that secondary link, this will be consistent across the iterations that I've made for this list. That second group link just fueling one biker or activating themselves has been really nice and consistent. So the concept here basically is a support link where they don't necessarily engage in rampart sweeping. What they want to do is they want to support the rest of your army with gunfighting when it's opportune for them to do so, but otherwise with spec fire, with smoke, and with carefully targeted hacking. So we saw, for example, in my previous report on Combined Army, how useful it could be to break up enemy defensive links that have heavy infantry with Oblivion. It can do that. It can't set up for guided fire because there is not in this list, but it's still got spec fire as a stopgap solution without needing any setup, etc. And in a pinch, it's 5 orders fueling a good warband. In Combat Group 1, we have Fiddler, who, as I mentioned, is really good, and she's in the list for that reason. We also have the Magariba Guard with Mine Dispenser. Now, at 85 points, the Magariba Guard is not necessarily the best tag for points in the game, but because we are playing Dashat Company, we have so many spare points. We may as well take something really deluxe and really expensive. And in that context, the Magariba is still a tag. Also, she has a paramedic inside, which is fantastic. And she has a suite of kind of useful tools. I will kind of always maintain that I wish there was an option to not take the 360 visor because it's very, very expensive, but you really can't complain about a mine dispenser and baggage and all of that kit on the same piece. It's just that she's got a big ass base, she's fat, and she could really stand to be a few points cheaper. But in Dashat, we can afford those few points. The rest of this list is warbands, and skirmishers, mimetisms, libertos, all with mimetism and mines this time. Another biker, and then 2 duos. So in this, what we're doing here is we're running the armed prospector diggers, which are impetuous, heavy infantry with assault, like chain rifle grenade assault kit. And we are duoing them with bounty hunters to give them the ability to take cover and act as really strong defensive roadblocks. Now, this is something that will actually change in the final iteration of the list, but it was an interesting idea and it had promise. And also, those pieces are so cheap that you afford this other stuff in the list. If nothing else, that's 4 orders for an average of 13 points apiece, with lots of high roll potential thanks to all of the booty. And just being a heavy infantry warband actually is a mixed blessing because being hackable and having no stealth sucks. If you want to think about how prospectors kind of play, they are like much more balanced version of tankos, but they are still really good in that role. And very occasionally one of them will roll up a heavy machine gun or +4 armor or mimetism -6, and the opportunities you have with them for that game will open up. Now, it's very worth noting in this list that there are still tons of points of float. You can trim a lot out of this list if you want to make some other decisions. And so we can see that manifested in the bikers. So the Kum Riders, which normally I would take the 6-point profile with light shotgun, I have splashed out 4 points per model to take them up to 10 points each to have a rifle and EMCCWs. That is a big cost increase relative to the base, but in Season 13, bikers are excellent and Coom Riders are amongst the best bikers for their cost in the game. Competed with really only by Desperados and to an extent some other Ariadne bikes who benefited highly as well. So they are so good for their cost that I feel like you can add 4 points to them sometimes and still play with them. And I've taken 2 of them. Now, notable in his absence is McMurrough, and that's for a pretty simple reason. You could actually fit him into this list by cutting points. You could cut the command token off the Ghoulam, that'll save you 4. You can cut the Coom Riders down. There are a few other bits and pieces that you can do. But ultimately, a list can only accommodate so many irregular orders. And for Dashat Company, that's kind of about 4. 5 would be way outside what I think is sort of your effective comfort zone. And if you are only going to take 4 irregular troops, then in ICS Season 13, the best 4 irregular troops for cost in Dashat, and frankly, possibly the entire game, are 2 Dashat Libertos and 2 Coom Riders, which means that McMurrough, shockingly, just doesn't make the cut, which is astounding because he's very good, but he's just not as good as they are. So that's about 20 minutes of talking about lists. Let's talk about games that were actually played. So this is one of the first ones that I ran with that first iteration of the list. I think in this version I was actually trying out, I did have a doctor in the list, rather than +1 command token Ghoulam. I might have had 1 rifle-armed Coom Rider, and I was trying out rifle-armed, because again, for 4 points, you can upgrade one of your diggers from chain rifles and grenades to a rifle and a light shotgun. So this is a game of, I think, Frontline versus the jurisdictional command of Bakunin. So what we've got present here are, there's a lot of high ground with plenty of mobility over the high ground, and then low ground movement in and around these sort of like quite tall shadow buildings. And I've set up, I've elected to go first. Frontline, I think, is a scenario that's very, very go firstable, because scoring, even in this edition, where there's a lot of live classifieds in the scenario, you get 4. You can make one of them in Intel Com, but you'll try to score at least 3 other classifieds. Even in that case, you can still kind of play the scenario very aggressively, because all of the in-zone scoring doesn't happen until the final turn, so you can play like it's Annihilation with extra steps to an extent. So having won the roll, my opponent picked sides, and this was sort of an overview of the table. And we'll just flick through to some deployment zone pictures. So this is my deployment zone after deployment. Again, we won't go through like a really full recap, but we've got the Magariba Guard as my reserve drop here alongside a biker. One of the duos is here on this rooftop with the bounty hunter on ground level, and I've actually rolled a heavy machine gun on that digger, which was hilarious. We've got Fiddler kind of hanging around here, ready to she deployed before the Magariba, but opportunistically support the Magariba. Another biker here, lots of camouflage markers across the midfield, some HVTs. Or HVT, maybe this was decapitation actually. No, this was decapitation. Now that I've noticed that, now that I've realized there are 2 HVTs. And then my link team has set up kind of on this building. And so over the course of the game, the link team would more or less stay in this location. They would slowly move their way up and over this bridge here, with the Spitfire kind of like taking attacks of opportunity, never engaging heavy enemy defenses, except when it needed to. And just providing orders for the biker and firing off grenades and generally being kind of useful. If we look at my opponent's deployment, we can see here that there's a distinct fort kickass. That's a Cyclone Fweback, which he's using to lay pitches for a significant number of moderator hackers. There's an Evo hacker down at ground level here. This looks like a lot of bodies in this area, but it's really just an Evo hacker, 1 moderator, a lizard, and an Uberfell commando. There is a lizard there. Then there are some Morlocks. There's a missile launcher over in this direction, and a single, not lieutenant, but Custodia just to add some sort of like interesting potential capability to the list. So how this game played out, and we'll just tab back to because it's easier to sort of tell the story from this picture, is a lot worked really well. And especially, I was really glad that I had the mine layer, McMurrough Guard, and she's been a staple since. There are a lot of 4-point flex slots in this list. You can pay 4 points to upgrade a shotgun to a rifle-light shotgun on a biker. You can pay 4 points to upgrade chain rifles and grenades on a prospector to a rifle-light shotgun. You can pay 4 points to upgrade a regular Golem Lieutenant to +1 command token. And you can pay 4 points to upgrade a McMurrough baseline profile to the Mine Dispenser. That is one change that I would not... Don't downgrade the McMurrough unless you absolutely have to, because it makes her a really effective rampart sweeper against single wound models. And so, for example, we have over here, she has come round this corner, she's laid some mines down here, and then she's engaged and destroyed the Cyclone. Now that face-to-face roll against a core-linked Feuerback is pretty fucking dicey, but when there are a pair of mines detonating to hit the same target, you've got a much better engagement against them. And that's basically really useful, because against all of the Omega snipers, that's a great play. Against the Cyclones are pretty rare as an ARO piece. I actually think it should have really been prone and popped up to throw pitches and be aggressive, but my opponent was concerned about his defenses. But that was just really useful. The core linked performed admirably. The bikes did really well as well, to the point that I'm convinced at this stage that yes, the not taking McMurrough was correct. The rifle-armed biker in this list went all the way down this flank. It killed everything over there, including the guided missile, and it eventually ran into close combat with the Lizard and zotted it with an EMCCW, which was a fantastic performance. And my opponent made a really game effort to come up and around this way with the Uberfall, but ultimately couldn't quite step on the gas enough. It took me quite a few turns. There's an engineer back there. That Cyclone got up multiple times, but the game felt really solid. I even had one over several games. This is what happened each time with Diggers, where the Diggers kind of just did nothing because the Libertos held the front line of defense. But at some point during a game, in basically every game that I've played so far, a Digger will voluntarily break out of duo, take an impetuous order, and kill something. So this one, which had rolled up the HMG, just late in the game, the Cyclone had stood back up again, it just activated and it ran, and it took a HMG gunfight with the Cyclone and killed it for free, which was fantastic. So this was a really good kind of like test bed of, does my irregular balance work? Yes. 4 irregulars was the right number. Are the bikers performing? Yes, fantastically. Is 2 bikers, one in the main group, one fueled by the link team working? Yes, actually, I really like that. How are the duos with the prospectors performing? Yeah, probably the weakest link as of this game, but that's fine because they're very cheap. So overall, basically, how this game went was a biker attack broke up my opponent's left flank. The Magariba kind of owned this space and dealt with the enemy link team. And from that point, it was really just waves of irregular troops in Libertos crashing against this Fort Kickass here. Taking it down, doing as much damage as I could over multiple turns. And eventually there's Major Kusanagi up here. She did a little bit of quite solid gunfighting, but she was ultimately just overmatched. And I think she eventually died to a spec fire grenade, which got me all of the HVT kills, lieutenant kills, army point kills. And my opponent, I don't believe, was actually able to get even a HVT kill. He probably would have been if he had been less pinned back, but the aggression was just really, really strong. So stepping on to the next game played with this list with some slight adjustments. This was a TTS game, played against a good mate from out of state. I'm not going to go really deeply into this one because, well, okay, so start with, I have the full footage. It's like 54 minutes of play. I could just upload it as a video if anyone wants to watch. But not to put too fine a point on it, the dice just won me this game incredibly hard. It happens sometimes, but it was a really cool NCA list. Packed everything, a Swiss Guard hacker, which was just awesome, really well constructed bolt core, great firepower, Peacemaker, Garuda tact bot, in retrospect, I actually think you just make that grid attack bot into a second peacemaker, but just really, really solid. But to set the stage, the very first thing that happened in the game is that a motorized bounty hunter drove down here, attempted to discover this Libertos. The Libertos shotgunned it. It fired 4 rounds at point blank with a Red Fury into the Libertos, and the Libertos lived and it died. And that just kind of kept happening. There was a subsequent engagement where the Libertos got spotlit by an enemy hacker, and then it successfully dodged like twice to get into approximate base contact with the bounty hunter, so it couldn't be targeted by missiles anymore because the splash would have caught the bounty hunter. And at that point, my opponent had to try and winkle it out the hard way, and it was, yeah. So kind of a nightmarish game for the Pan-Oceanian player, who still made a really game go of it. But once again, the skirmishers held the line really effectively. The Magariba was great against the Bolt Core. She moved up this direction, zotted mines down to there, and then was able to engage the Bolt Sniper. Now, the Bolt Sniper is shock immune, so it did end up getting brought back in the game by Pandra, who actually slots into that link really well. Yes, seriously, I actually love that NCA list, and it has by Pandra in it. But it was too little too late. Like, Pan-Oceania never wants to be pinned back so aggressively like that. And the Magariba Guard was able to just kind of consistently neutralize those bolts. And eventually a biker attack was launched up this flank, which just, again, like, it just passed. When Coom Riders attack and pass 3/4 of their armor rolls, it's very, very gross. This game, more than anything, kind of cemented for me the bikers are the correct next to irregular pieces after the Libertos. It was kind of a known phenomenon in N4, that N3 rather, that sometimes a Libertos, and especially a Dashat Libertos, could just like toilet bowl your opponent's game by getting just a little bit lucky. I had one game against an extremely competent Tunguska player where one Libertos in an armory room literally held it for the entire turn just by succeeding on slightly too many dodges and by passing slightly too many armor rolls. And what Dashat has now is, in addition to its 2 Libertos, it has 2 equivalently effective troops on bikes with more armor. A Coom Rider in this edition, in ITS 13, is a motorized Dashat Libertos, and it is with melee capability, and it is very, very strong. What came out of this, though, was I had a really good chat with my opponent after the game about how we might be able to change the list. And what I observed was basically the same thing that had happened this game as in previous games, where the duos with the prospectors, they weren't terrible, but they kind of weren't doing a lot. They were adding a layer of insulation after the Libertos that I probably would have been very glad to have had if my opponent had been able to breach the Libertos cordon, but I wanted something that had that plus the ability to go a little more aggressive and a little more mobile. I basically wanted a better moving part. And what we ended up coming up with was this, which I think I really like. So it's a very, very similar core, but it trims down and cuts quite a lot of pieces. So you can see it's still got the 2 Rafik remotes. The Ghulam NCO, so the Ghulam Lieutenant has lost his command token. The bikers have both gone back down to light shotguns. I know that the rifle light shotgun one did actually perform really well against it. It zotted a tag in the game against Nomads, but we're looking to cut some points here. And it cuts both authorized bounty hunters. And what it gets are a couple of things. Firstly, it gets a Fanus remote, which is cheaper than an authorized bounty hunter. That's totally fine. It gets 2 Nazmats on Fiddler, which are probably the most experimental part of this build, but then it gets Miranda Ashcroft, and she's what I like most about this change. Now, you could straight up cut those Nazmats if you wanted to. They are a little bit of an experiment in just having more and more troops. I like how they let you play in supplies by having Fiddler run up and grab a box and give one to a Nazmat and run while the Nazmat runs away, while she either attacks or moves on to another one. I like having them just as minesweepers. I like how they just add up the list. You can literally just use them as picket pieces. If your opponent is doing like the Ariadne meme thing where they give you a blank courtesy list and a million camouflage markers, you just put those Nazmats on rooftops watching the battlefield. They are only 3 points, and again, in Dashat, you are looking for ways to productively spend those points. And if a Nazmat ends up being kind of like a warcore with extra steps, something for your opponent to shoot, that's worth 3 points. Bakunin players use Pupniks as distractions for 1 point apiece, and a Nazmat is worse at dodging, but it can claim cover and has mimetism. So I think it's worth experimenting with. The main thing, the thing that's really interesting here, is that rather than having those authorized bounty hunters, we have one of the, again, the Rafiqs are stand-in for prospectors. One of the prospectors is unlinked, but the other duos with Miranda. And I think that's a real nice play. That feels like it plays well, because what it does is it changes the nature of that duo from opportunistic. Maybe both the bounty hunter and or the prospector have rolled up something interesting. Instead, we have the prospector might roll up something interesting, and indeed you can deploy the prospectors and then deploy Miranda after you know who she's going to duo with, because you'll get to see, who rolls up. You have to lock the prospectors in place. You have to say this prospector is deploying in order to make its booty roll. But once you've done that, then you can then deploy Miranda and form your links later in the game, later in the deployment phase. Once you know, like, oh, this prospector rolled up +4 armor and this one rolled up grenades, the idiot, he already has those. Jeff, they hand those out as free samples. Are you stealing them from the armory? I'm not salty about that. That's happened in 2 games so far. But like, say you get a prospector with 7 armor, Miranda duos with that. All of a sudden, you have the prospector as a premier assault piece. You have Miranda as both a very good gunfighter with a multi-rifle and a specialist, and of course you have the duo's close combat ability, because both of them are good at close combat in different ways. So I've only tested this in 1 game so far, and spoiler alert, it was okay. It felt useful and flexible. Other things were the hero, but I like that as kind of this list approaching its final form. There's also a Red Fury on the Bounty Hunter over a Spitfire because we did not have the points. But again, if you did not want these Nazmats, you could cut both of them. You could re-up the Bounty Hunter to a Spitfire, and then you would have 5 points to spend. You could make the Fanus back into an authorized Bounty Hunter. You could make either of the Bikers into having a rifle. You could add a Doctor back in. Any of the 4-point upgrades you could make. So this I really like. I'll tinker with those Nazmats. We will see if they justify their existence. But let's do a really quick recap of a game that I played that in. So this is a game that I've played against Onyx Contact Force. In this scenario, we're playing Frontline. Interesting to note, both players have kind of agreed that they don't want to deal with more than 2 of those mountain terrain zones, so we've just chucked them on the side of the table edge. But this was using that list. So we've got a Nazmat has deployed over here, usefully just as something to deploy the Mega Reaper in base contact with, in order to engage it if it gets possessed, which is a very real threat against Onyx Contact Force. You can't see it, but there's another one just over here, where it's literally standing up like a war correspondent watching this long terrain line here, just to draw fire. The Gulam Core Link is deployed in this space here. This black bounty hunt motorcycle is the free bounty hunter that you get in this scenario. And then we've got our bikers around here. And then what I've done is that there is 1 prospector over here, and there's 1 prospector over here. And then Ashcroft is deployed here. And she's ended up duoing with this one. I can't remember what it rolled, but it was something reasonable. I think it was like plus 2 armor, plus 1 armor. And so she's duoed with it, ready to move off down this direction. Sorry, this is Ashcroft. This is the prospector, but you get the idea. This is Frostbite, not Frontline. Wonderful. That's why there's a free biker. That's why there are all of these objectives on the table. Frostbite. Good job. I prepared well for this. So I've made Fiddler into the Snow Ops. Could also make Mega Reaper into the Snow Ops, but she already survives the zone. And Fiddler is really, really good, which we'll kind of get to. So my opponent has deployed a Unidron sort of core in this tower. It's got a Nexus Hacker Lieutenant in it. It's got Kernow. It's got a Sniper and a couple of spare Unidrons. There's a guided missile remote hanging out back here. There are some Imitrons. There are some Flash Pulse remotes. And then there is the, back behind here, There's the Big Daddy Zeodron Harris with K1 Marksman, Red Fury Zeodron, and then an Umbra Samaritan Hacker. So he makes the Samaritan into the Snow Ops so that he can literally dump like 140 points, 150 points into the zone, get wrecked. I will dominate this zone, and also like good at pushing buttons, etc., etc. Now, one of the things about this matchup is Onyx Contact Force are not really a power faction in N4, but there are some things that they do very well. And so one of them is that, Bit and Kiss also are deployed kind of like back here. They are amongst the kings of repeaters in this edition. Kernow is Ballistic Skill 12 and is core linked, and of course Bit and Kiss are great at laying repeaters. You can spam out repeaters if you want to and make aggressive hacking attacks. You can spotlight. The list has got Umbra Samaritan, who can be spotlighting as that link moves forward 6 inches at a time. You have the Nexus Lieutenant, who is a lieutenant who can spotlight. You can spotlight in ARO, and of course you can launch possession attempts as well against the Magariba Guard. Now I'm reasonably defended against that in this scenario because the Magariba, not only is it a really long way away, and there's this tall terrain in the midfield kind of blocking the pitcher attempts, at least from Kern now. Bit and Kiss would need to move up. She's also got ECM hacking, which is nice, and she is in base contact with a Nazmat. So if she gets possessed, she'll be engaged, and then if she activates while she's engaged, I will attempt to counter-possess her through this Fanus remote with Valyria Gromos, just to kind of like hopefully get her back before my turn. All of that is just designed to kind of make it difficult to possess the Maggie, but what I am genuinely concerned about is that he will just lay pitches down kind of in this space here with Kernow and just missile strike my link. So they're spread out so that a single missile can't kill more than any one troop. So in this entire deployment, I think I actually ended up moving this Jackbot at some point before I locked in deployment or something. But basically there is no one missile strike that can really hit two things apart from maybe this Jackbot and this Prospector. Literally everything else is separated by some combination of elevation, total cover, etc. Even if this Bounty Hunter like breaks cover and jukes back there, it's going to be a missile on the Bounty Hunter won't hit that Ghoul. The Bounty Hunter, to note, also is deployed quite aggressively. It will be able to see Kernow with its Red Fury if it stands up. I am doing that purely to try and waste my opponent's time on the first turn. That's a free Red Fury Bounty Hunter. I would not normally throw a piece like that away, but I was really worried about that hacking attack. So what actually happens, my opponent is, he sort of splits his attention and accomplishes a few things during his turn. The first thing is that he forces the Red Fury back into cover. He moves up, sort of like scouts some opening, draws out some fire, and then pulls back with this Bounty Hunter. And then he moves Bit and Kiss up and just lays some intensely annoying pitches in locations that are very hard for me to get to. But I don't take many casualties. In fact, I think the only casualty I take that is notable is that Nazmat I mentioned who was standing up drawing fire, which gets, I think it takes 2 or 3 orders for the Zeodron core to wipe it out. Now, it's Zeodron Harris. That's not a huge order sink because the thing about the Zeodron link is that it moves 6-2. So he's not giving up much effective forward momentum to make that kill. But still, it was like a kind of good proof of concept for the little Nazmats. The biggest challenge I have going into my first turn is that this sniper has moved to here, and my usual Magariba bullshit is not particularly effective against it. It's actually the best sniper in the game for cost for avoiding that mine dispenser situation. I don't want to just get cheeky and throw repeaters out there, because if I have to make a fight of it, I don't really want Gromos to try and deal with Kernow as the first step. That Trinity is dangerous. It's also difficult for me to get Gromos into a position because she's kind of at ground level. It's difficult for me to get those pitches up there in the first place. I don't really think I have an angle. And the mines from the Magariba don't put a Unidron down in one go the same way that they do a Bolt, because the Unidron will go dogged and it will just sort of guaranteed last the turn. So I have to kind of content myself with the Magariba moves all the way up to here, gets the mines down, kills the something killed the Bounty Hunter Red Fury, gets the mines down. it puts the Unidron sniper into unconscious, and then it just has to kind of stop. I give up forward momentum at that point. Obviously, I clear off all of the, or as many of the repeaters as I can. That takes its own effort. This biker here ends up, was it that one? Yeah, that biker there ends up clearing off repeaters, getting spotlit. It does move up and it's able to kill Bit and Kiss, and it actually ends up targeted, but alive at the end of turn. So I've killed Bit and Kiss, I've killed one Unidron. That's the whole turn. I've killed a bunch of repeaters. It's not ideal. My opponent is about to go into his, and one bounty hunter. My opponent will go into his turn with his Harry's fully intact, but kind of you just have to make that sacrifice against Onyx sometimes because of the Dogged. On his turn, he kills Libertos and the Kum Rider with guided missiles because they had been targeted in the process of clearing out repeaters, but it takes him a few orders. The Libertos especially dodges quite well. I think what actually ends up happening is that the biker repeats the tactic that Libertos used in the previous game, where the biker survives the first missile shot by dodging, and it dodges around to sit next to Kiss, who is alive, but Bit is dead, and by sitting next to Kiss, he can't missile me anymore because the splash would hit his own trooper. So he then has to use some long-range shots from the Fireteam Harries, which take several orders to clear off the biker. Now, at this point, he moves his Harries kind of up and around here and here, and what he does is he sets up to engage the McMurrough with the K1. But it spangs the first order. Now, really what he should have done here is just double down. The burst 4 +1 damage, good range for him, mediocre range for me. He could have just invested 3 or 4 orders, whatever it takes, to kill the McMurrough and put her down to dead, and then pull back, ready to sort of attack and then control the zone in the next turn. But he just kind of got worried. He got that like feeling that you get sometimes where it didn't work the first time, so it was not going to work. So he ended up repositioning, killing sort of, little bits and pieces, and ended up with the Zeodrons kind of here and here. There's cover in between them, and then the Umbra here. And that was, and some Unidrons kind of repositioned to defend. But so like it's like what have we got? It's the Samaritan is here, and then the Zeodrons are there and there. And he isolates, doesn't possess, he isolates the McMurrough. And he does that because he has like 1 order left at that point. But he gets it, he overcomes the ECM, overcomes the BTS. Umbra is a very good hacker, and he isolates the McMurrough. So my forces are kind of intact, mostly apart from the ablative defense, and the Unidron core sniper is kind of down at this point, but I have to deal with the situation. Fortunately, I have Fiddler, and she's incredible. She's used the Snow Ops in a previous order to come up to here, and then she just comes out here, and she and the Jackbots attack. On the way through, she de-oblivions the Maggie. She fixes it. I can't activate it because it's under control of the Samaritan, and if I let it get possessed in my turn, I'm rooted. But basically, Fiddler and the Jackbots attack up this path, and they just shred. They're one of the best anti-tag troops in the game. Fiddler hangs back outside flamethrower template, heavy flamethrower template range if it's a HFT tag. Obviously these aren't, they are Zeodrons, and she just engages them one at a time with her and the Jackbots. And those Jackbot templates, if you don't dodge, eating 4 damage 14 continuous damage templates is a major threat even to a tag. And she's surprisingly capable of winning those face-to-face rolls as well with her contender. And if you offer her, they will almost always take that face-to-face. Not that you even have to. She's got drop bears. You can just run in with the Jackbots. And still, same thing. It's like hugely threatening. So she ends up just like absolutely, she just jacks both of those tags. The Samaritan survives, ends up running away, but she kills like 100 and something points in the turn. That uses most of my orders though. So like I've made an effort. I've got a HV. I've got the heavy infantry, the HVT follow up classified. So Ashcroft and her duo are kind of moving up here. And if I'd had more orders and had needed it, then Ashcroft coming around here and engaging Unidrons and the Umbra Samaritan would have been, I think, actually a totally viable game plan as well. just Ashcroft with her multi-rifle, leading into close assault with the prospector. You don't want to close assault a Samaritan, really, but it felt like it would have been serviceable if I had needed it as the option. Now, really, all that leaves my opponent with is kind of he's got like a whole lot of nothing apart from the Samaritan as his on his last turn, and it just comes around here and it runs into close combat with the Magariba, monofilaments it, and then dies to the heavy flamethrower. And at that point, my opponent concedes because he's stuffed. He's not been able to accomplish everything. I've got full bottle of orders on my next turn, which is the last turn. He has nothing in the zone, so I will be dominating it. All I need to do is do some classifieds and press a button. And that's the win. So if we just sort of tab back through, this again is that list. Really happy with it. I might take it to, we've got an event coming up in a couple of weeks. I am running the event, so I am not guaranteed to play. Often I will sit out, I will sort of take the bye, so to make sure that players who've turned up, particularly for like only can play a couple of rounds, people playing Dad Infinity basically, make sure that they get games. But I might run this. I enjoyed it, and it is just super, super different to that Zhuyong and Rui Shi and McMurrough style Dashat that carried us NA2 players through the previous edition. So really like it. Hope this was interesting to you. Let me know sort of what changes you might make. Again, especially with those Nazmats. Would you run something else instead of the prospectors? Would you just cut a Nazmat and Miranda and take McMurrough and just kind of live with the real kind of awkwardness of the 5 irregular troops? How would you play this list? Also, still looking for feedback on sound quality. I have massively amped the gain after some notes about the previous video being quiet, so hopefully the volume for this is good. And also, the current Loss of Lieutenant monthly challenge is to play an unlimited insertion list, which I'm not quite feeling. We actually did an unlimited insertion event in Canberra in a sort of several months previous, pre the current lockdown, and it was really interesting. But it's fine. It's good. I played a 17 or 18 model Hack Islam list versus a 20 model Caledonia list in the final, and it was kind of exactly what you would expect. And a Mukhtar did a great deal of work, and it was all a little bit messy because we were all a bit out of practice and kind of fumbly playing with such high order counts. Didn't love it, didn't hate it. Have some thoughts about a middleway variant, not just full-on unrestricted. What I would actually like to do, and maybe once we're past the introduction to Season 13, I will run an event where troopers that do not begin the game on the table do not count towards your maximum of 15. So troopers in hidden deployment or deploying via airborne are exceptions to your usual trooper limit. I think that has a lot of potential actually as a halfway house to introduce hidden information uncertainty back into the game and allow you to play like, maybe 16, maybe 17 troops without going all the way up to 20, or even the 3 combat group silliness that I ran in the previous edition. So that basically closes this out. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please leave a comment, in particular how the sound quality and the volume is, and if there are other armies or other things that you would like to hear a take on or hear a review into. Akari Company is kind of on my radar as well, following ITS 13. Desperados are pretty attractive with them, and of course they have Yojimbo, who is a big beneficiary of the ITS 13 bike changes. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you again soon.